Good evening and welcome to Nashville. I'm Alan Jackson. It is a good evening indeed. After 2 long years, there is peace in Israel and Gaza, and the hostages are coming home to their loved ones. There were plenty of people who thought it might never happen, but even as Hamas was withering, President Trump never gave up. The tenacity of he and his negotiating team was a force to behold. Well, joining us tonight to discuss is the senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Brent Sadler. Welcome, sir.
Hey, thank you for having me on, Alan.
This is such great news for the people of Israel and especially for the families of the hostages. So please begin by just giving us a sense of how this got done despite all the odds against it.
Yeah, absolutely. It actually goes back about a year for Israel's successful operations against Hezbollah, of course, Hamas, it continued to grind down. And then more recently in the summer, the attacks against Iran and their nuclear regime that included, some very precise attacks from U.S. military forces. Altogether, the forces that benefited from sowing this kind of violence, the Iranian regime principally, had been set back and unable to resupply or provide any meaningful support to Hamas. And then with the success of the Abraham Accords, which goes back to President Trump's first term, you had a context of willing partners that wanted to work with Israel in a host of issues, economic, and now are engaging in that same level of trust to try to rebuild better for the Palestinians in Gaza, absent any future with Hamas. And that's how we got to where we are. The threat from force has always been necessary to compel a group, a terrorist group like Hamas, of course, and that danger, that sword of Damocles is still hanging over their head.
Brent, I think that's such an important point. I read where Dr. Scott Peck once said that the only thing evil will yield to is a power greater than itself. And so this hostage release isn't just the result of a clever negotiation, but an expression of power and authority in the region over many months. Did I understand that correctly?
Absolutely. I think it's the embodiment of President Trump often talks about the art of the deal. It's not just what happens on the paper or what's written in the paper or what happens in the boardroom in the negotiation, but what happens in the lead up and what happens in the room next to. So setting the right context is, I think, more important in getting this peace, which could be regional peace, set.
Well, I want our viewers to see and hear how the people of Israel responded when they heard the news in Israel's hostage square. It's just outside the Museum of Art in Tel Aviv.
Thank you, Trump! Thank you, USA!
Brent, from what you've seen across the past few months, how are the hostages who were released earlier this year doing now?
Well, what we've seen is they are recovering quickly once they've gotten out of the clutches of Hamas and their depraved conditions they were kept under. Their health in large point seems to be recovering. There's going to be some, as the only people I've run into, like Senator McCain, who was a prisoner of war in Hanoi Hilton for many years, there are going to be scars and physical damage to many of these folks that they're going to be living with for the rest of their lives. But for the most part, it appears the families are happy, very much so. And the people, the prisoners that they have released, the hostages, are pretty much on the up and up by all accounts.
I realize that some of the details are still being worked out, but tell us what you can about the larger peace plan.
Yeah, the larger peace plan, it really begins with the positive vision that President Trump laid out with this very successful Abraham Accords. It was a deal that was to basically acknowledge what is already existing. Many of these countries in the Middle East, while outwardly saying some pretty reprehensible things and being very negative or anti-Israel, privately they were more than willing to do business and to grow that business and even to exchange, have cultural exchanges. So building on that, the Abraham Accords kind of codified it. And one of the theories is that Saudi Arabia's joining of that is one of the triggers for Iran to agitate its proxies to attack on October 6th or 7th in 2023. So the possibility is because there's an appetite across the region for something new and something positive, and all they needed was something to center around, some gravitational or positive image, and that seems to be the Abraham Accords.
I've been told that Lebanon and maybe even Syria could be brought into those Abraham Accords. Have you heard any of that?
I've heard that. I think Lebanon is a very distinct possibility, especially as they deal with making sure that Hezbollah remains disarmed and only a political body inside Lebanon that respects the national government. That becomes very likely. Syria is still in the throes of coming out of a decade-long civil war, but clearly, if the leadership there continues signaling their willingness to join into it, that's a good sign that perhaps the worst in the region can actually come over and become one of the partners for peace.
One of the tougher aspects of this negotiation is getting Hamas to disarm. I can't think of any terrorist group that has ever done that, at least for any length of time. Do you have any reference for that?
Well, some of the terrorist organizations that have been disarmed have been done through the force of arms or being incarcerated. I think many of the communist-inspired ones, Marxist-inspired ones in Europe at the height of the Cold War. But I think in this case, and I think it's critical to mention, the success of this 21-point peace plan that President Trump unveiled doesn't rely, it's not conditioned on Hamas's acquiescence or putting down its weapons. They can do it the hard way, which means they continue to fight on until they're extinct, or they can do the easy way. They lay down their weapons and they're allowed to go somewhere else to host them.
Well, I know a part of this deal involves releasing hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. You know, that's exactly how it's been done before. Do you think they'll have to be returned to somewhere other than the Gaza Strip this time?
This is a good question. It's a detail that I think is extremely important. No real insight exactly how this is going to play out. I would assume, as past his prologue, that these folks are going to be let back to their families in Gaza, but also, as long as Hamas exists, also back to their former bosses. And again, the key part of this peace plan is that Hamas has no future in Gaza or the Palestinian territories, and instead a new provisional, technocratic, but certainly with oversight from the United States, Israel, and other trusted Middle Eastern countries, a governance body. So hopefully we don't see the past repeat, even though we're giving back quite a lot of very bad actors.
Well, you've alluded to it already, but the wider peace plan involves several Arab countries. It's not just about Hamas and Gaza. It's got the makings of another Abraham Accords. What can you tell us about who worked with the president's team to get this deal?
Not too much insight on that. It's been done very well to keep it under wraps. What other players were engaged? You saw some of the pictures in that have been made public since the announcement of this agreement by Hamas. You know, Turkey, Egypt certainly stand out in that. Qatar's role has been long acknowledged, but there are probably other players as well that are also involved, but we just haven't heard what their role has been.
Well, Brent, we need to take a short break, but if you'll stay with us for another segment, there's a lot more to discuss. We'll be right back. We're back now with a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation and former Navy captain, Brent Sadler. You know, the Nobel Peace Prize is typically awarded in early December. They've been giving it out every year since 1901, and there's never been anyone who's created more peace than President Trump in such a short period of time, less than a year. Am I right in that assessment?
Absolutely. I think the very strong case, and I would say an overdue one, quite frankly, for President Trump being awarded the Nobel Peace Prize.
What do you suppose those people that have Trump derangement syndrome will do if he is actually awarded the Nobel Prize? We'll need a new budget for mental health care.
Probably, and probably cleaning up the mess when they lose their bodily control for a few moments after it. But the vast majority of folks, even those that don't like politically what Trump is doing, I think can all come around the point that the world is a better place thanks to his leadership, and would acknowledge that an award like the Nobel Peace Prize is definitely earned.
When this peace plan is settled, do you have any idea what's next for Benjamin Netanyahu? Has he given any clues?
I think there's a political question in Israel, elections. Those will probably be foremost on his mind, you know, after things kind of get settled. That's assuming that there isn't any speed bumps in the next 3 or 4 days and the arrival of the living hostages back into Israel. That's the key milestone. I think once you get past that, things become a lot more easy into a new and better future for the Israelis and also for the Palestinians after this war is over. But politics is politics. It never sleeps, and it's always competitive. And Netanyahu's got to deal with that.
Well, I'm no expert in Israeli politics, but from a distance, it seems like they're every bit as polarized as we are here in America. You know, in the last 2 years, with Bibi in charge, they've decimated Hezbollah. They've taken Iran off the global stage as a nuclear threat. I mean, clearly with U.S. help. Hamas is being whittled down. The hostages looks like will be returned. That should make you a national hero. But there's still a strong segment of the Israeli public that is very angered with his leadership. What do you think it would take for him to be recognized as someone who's contributed in a positive way?
Yeah, I think politics, it's each place is different, even in the United States. Each community, each state's different, what motivates people to vote certain ways. I think there's a tendency outside of Israel for the media, and certainly with left-leaning media, to try to play up the dissent. And a lot of the dissent was just reminding and agitating for release and to get a ceasefire, to get the hostages back. But when you look at the polls of the Israelis, they were not entertaining a future that had Hamas in it or ending the fighting without dealing with Hamas. So the war execution, sometimes there's criticisms of it, of getting the hostages back, but I think Israelis support that. They supported the prime minister's direction. But there's financial scandals of the past that might get brought back up. As soon as the fighting dies, everyone will then focus back onto kitchen table type issues. It's just inevitable nature of democracies. And while the war record is, commendable, it's not necessarily enough to get reelected. Look at Winston Churchill after World War II.
Well, there was a great loss of life in Gaza, and Israel lost many soldiers as well. Everyone in Israel serves in the military, so it's going to take some time for the country to heal. How do you see things going forward on the ground there?
Yeah, there's actually a couple of fronts on this. I mean, there was the damage even in Israel proper from the many missile attacks from Iran, Hezbollah, the Houthis, which still hasn't stopped. It still episodically is going on. Maybe now it will stop because Hamas is laying down their weapons. And of course, Hamas's missile attacks and rocket attacks in Israel. So there's that. There's the human toll, which you kind of alluded to as well. And again, I think Israel is very used to living in a very dangerous neighborhood and having to fight for its survival in its short history. I think they will be fine, and they'll be moving on in true Israeli fashion very quickly to get to the next big challenge.
Absolutely. Turkey seems to be trying to fill some of the void that Iran has created with what they have endured. Do you think Turkey is going to take a larger out front role in the future of the Middle East?
I think it's no secret that Erdogan, the current leader in Turkey, does aspire to some sort of greater Turkish influence across the Middle East, almost reminiscent of the old Ottoman Empire, even with its Islamic trappings. So there is that. Whether or not he's able to deliver on it's a different thing. Clearly, the Turks are very concerned and very engaged in northern Syria. I don't see that changing anytime soon as they continue to worry about their own domestic Kurdish population.
It will take the Prince of Peace to restore order to the Middle East. Well, while we're celebrating this tremendous victory with the hostages, I want to be greedy for just a moment. Let's pivot a little different direction. If Trump's team could bring this about in the Middle East, do you have hope they're going to bring a resolution to the Ukraine-Russia conflict in the near future?
Yes, I think the conditions like we saw with Hamas are being set for Putin, where if he doesn't go to the negotiating table, there's going to be a heavy price to pay. And I think the weather is also going to intervene. At the end of this month, the rainy season kicks in, and the fighting will naturally subside. It's a great time also for negotiations to start up. And again, there's new weapons heading to Ukraine. Ukraine has new weapons of its own. There's a reason compelling Putin to see an end to the war as well.
That would be a remarkable conclusion to this year if we could see that conflict resolved as well. We would have to say God is moving in the earth. Brent Sadler,
Yes.
Thank you for carving out some time for us on this very important and historic day. We very much appreciate your insight.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Well, I'll be back with signs of hope in just a moment. You know, as a matter of objective fact, Hamas is a group of murderous thugs, so that arriving at a deal that would be honored, it's tenuous at best. But for the sake of those hostages, I pray that this deal holds together. You know, we recently had the 2-year anniversary of the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel. And since that happened, Hamas has been dramatically reduced in their influence. Hezbollah was the terror proxy on the northern border of Israel. At that time, they had hundreds of thousands of rockets, Iranian and Russian made. Since then, Hezbollah has been almost completely neutralized. At the time of the October 7th attack, Iran was threatening nuclear annihilation on a regular basis and working to develop the bomb as quickly as possible. Their nuclear capabilities have now been sidelined. There have been tremendous expressions of mercy that bring up the possibility of peace to the whole region, but it's come at a very high price. You know, as Christians, we need an awareness to what's happening and recognize that Israel does matter. I don't believe that you can understand the Bible if you don't have some insight and understanding into the role of Israel and the Jewish people. I think the most significant principle is that the Jewish people are a chosen people, chosen by God. I believe we have a debt to the Jewish people. Without them, we would have no story. We would have no faith. We would have no prophets. We would have no scripture. We would have no law. We would have no Messiah. Our heroes in the New Testament, almost without exception, are Jewish. Well, it gives us some sense of the significance God attaches to the people in the nation of Israel. There's just no one else like the people of Israel in history, in God's economy, and in God's relationship with Adam and his descendants. So when we pray for the peace of Jerusalem, we want to pray in alignment with Scripture. They're not like all the other nations. If we'll do that, I promise there's reasons for hope in our future. We'll be right back with your emails. Stay with us. Thank you for spending a few minutes of your day with us. Just a reminder, you can go to ajnow.com and you can subscribe to our weekly brief and stay up to date on all of our shows. I think it'll be a help. And thank you for your emails. They are always a highlight for all of us. G. Sanchez wrote in, with great respect, I was hoping to gain your thoughts on a particular matter that has been the subject of much public discussion. Given the highly unusual political climate and the unprecedented events we've witnessed in recent years, I've heard various discussions regarding the hypothetical possibility of a current president potentially seeking or perhaps somehow attaining a third term in office. I understand the established constitutional frameworks, but I would be immensely grateful for your unique insight, perhaps from a historical, prophetic, or even spiritual viewpoint. Well, I don't think a third term for President Trump is probably the solution to our problems. I don't think it's legal, but beyond that, he has pointed us in a direction of biblical values, of biblical worldview. Now it's up to those of us who are citizens to hold those values. We have a representative form of government. And we need a change in the hearts of people who live on Main Street of America to be reflected in Washington, D.C. I think God has used President Trump to give us momentum in that direction. Now it's up to us to hold that line. Angela in Colorado wrote, how do we combat all the hypocrisy that exists now in so many Christian churches, especially amongst the congregants? Well, Angela, I don't mean to be snarky, but hypocrisy is not new to the church. It takes the people in the churches choosing the truth. There have always been that struggle in our midst. We follow it all the way through the Hebrew Bible and right into the New Testament. The 21st century is no different. It takes courage on all of our parts to choose the truth and to live it out every day. And then AT from Tennessee wrote in, why are we hearing about the genocide of Christians in Nigeria from proclaimed atheist Bill Maher? But no one else in the public arena or church is speaking up on the topic. Well, I'm glad you brought it up. There is a systematic genocide of Christians being committed in Nigeria. Thousands and thousands of people systematically murdered. And you're right, there's been too much silence. In fact, I think we're desperately trying not to notice. Thank you for the reminder. At the very least, let's begin to pray. Well, I thank you for the time you spent with us today. I'm Alan Jackson, and you have a wonderful evening.